Right, Rwanda 2018 Africa Trade Summit, of course, has come and gone, and 44 countries have put pen to paper to declare their intentions in joining that African free trade. Impressive numbers have been projected to indicate just what the potential benefits might be to African countries once this becomes a reality. We're now joined by analyst Victor Goetswana to unpack this historic pact. Victor, good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Mohani.
This is a seminal moment for Africa, no doubt.
It is, no doubt, except the notes say 55 years since the formation of the African Union. It's 40 years since the intention was expressed by the African Union, then the Organization of African Unity. But it's a very good turning point, at least African countries agreeing that they need to form a free trade, which is what people like us would have been screaming for. The question is, what will happen in the phase 2 of the negotiation? And that's where these countries have to first ratify, as in we are surely in. Secondly, they must work out regimes to work on the intellectual properties, competition, what constitutes this and that, and how do we deal with disputes? Because that's where the trade is going to happen or not happen.
Perhaps putting a bit of a dampener on things was the absence of Nigeria. I mean, if we look at the EU's experience, countries like Germany having to carry the weaker ones, is that part of what Nigeria is concerned about, and can they be brought back into the fold?
First of all, if Nigeria is not part of it, this deal is going to flounder because Nigeria is far too big, both in terms of the market we're talking about. We're saying 1.2 billion Africans. Well, 20% of that are Nigerian. So if you take Nigeria out of the equation, it's of too much significance. Secondly, the economy of Nigeria has just been doing way too well for it to be ignored. It's a very crucial member of ECOWAS. It's a member of this economy, and it's a very good, shall I say, frontier market. But yes, I'm sure Nigeria is thinking, I don't quite know the details why the president would not be, but one of the reasons countries would be reluctant is because you sign, but you must come back and talk to your private sector, and talk to your governments, and list items that you're going to be able to release into this free trade. Because we're talking duty-free, most of all, duty-free access. Most governments are still relying on duties, customs, and all those kinds of import-related taxes. Now, to say, let go of that before you've seen the benefits is where the African countries are battling.
Just as your economy is taking off. The other complication, of course, is francophone Africa, the reliance on Paris there. That might also add a complicated dynamic to what happens.
I'm glad you mentioned francophone, because it's one of those scattered communities. French-speaking countries are all over, in the north, in the east, in the west, in the southern parts. So you're right, because there's still an element of relying or more alignment between African countries and their colonial powers. Francophone countries default to the Commonwealth and London. Francophone, as you say, is a lot more to Paris, but there are signs that there are lots more integration. And that's why this deal is important, because it brought SADC, ECOWAS, and EAC and COMESA. So it at least brings in the regional economic blocs that have been seen as impotent all these years.
But again, what happens to those blocs economically, politically? Do they fall apart? Do we say bye-bye SADC and ECOWAS?
No, in fact, they shouldn't. The protocol says if any of those regional economic blocs has already achieved a higher level of integration than the new free trade, which is continental, the default position will be what it has been doing. So East African community with the common protocols will be common protocol for the customs and duties will be in a better position than the continental. ECOWAS has the external tariffs agreements, they will rather default to that. So it's actually an amalgamation of these, shall I say, regional economic blocs into one. It's going to take a long time, but at least I like the fact that it's official. We know everybody's in.
I remember when former US President Bill Clinton came to South Africa, and his rallying call was trade, not aid. If this takes off, it's not going to be at the mercy or the generosity of the West. Africa is going to be able to take its seat at the table and make those demands internationally.
That's the beauty. They'll be able to negotiate as one bloc. But most forget trading with the rest of the world. At the moment, if 100 rand is being spent in trade across the African continent, 15 rand is among African countries. That's a shame. So if we just increase that, and it has gone up by nearly 10% in 1 year, and before that a similar percentage. So you're right. The trade among African countries, that's the one thing we are undermining. So far, we are trading extractive minerals with one another and some manufacturers that includes processed foods and all that. We need to go into electronics, which are where the minerals that we are exporting come back as.
I mean, the potential is just quite staggering in terms of beneficiation if we start talking to each other.
Yeah.
But also, you know, politically, we've often discussed, you know, the movement of people within our borders and how all of those things were decided in Berlin, 200 years ago. Suddenly, all of that is out of the question. We've got free movement of goods. We've got free movement of people within the continent.
No, we don't. And I travel the continent. I can tell you it doesn't happen.
Well, I'm saying if this takes off, then we will.
It should be. But remember, there are tariff barriers, Bongani, and there are non-tariff barriers. Non-tariff barriers are those barriers like the one you're mentioning. Driving from here to Swaziland can be a nightmare, right? Driving into Lesotho can be a nightmare because most borders still have 2 border posts, except for the Chirundu border post between Zambia and Zimbabwe and a few borders between Rwanda and its neighbors. Most border posts still have 2. What does a border post do? It's like a roadblock. It gives somebody an opportunity to solicit a bribe from you, and once that happens, they slow down trade, they slow down movement. It's going to be a nightmare getting the non-tariff barriers out of the way. At least with the tariffs, you can negotiate them and they go. But the non-tariffs, trust me, it's going to be a nightmare. I'm optimistic, but you understand I'm being realistic as well.
Well, we've often spoken about the African Renaissance. I remain a believer and optimistic. Let's see what happens as we watch the developments. Thank you very much there for your analysis. Now,